Om Sahana Bhavatu Sahano Punattu Saha Viryam Karavavahe Tejasvinavaditamastu ma vidvishavahe. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. So we've left off on completing Sattvik Buddhi, Rajasic Buddhi, and we were about to start Tamasic Buddhi, if you can call Tamasic Buddhi Buddhi, if anything, intellect. So whilst you're doing your chart, I don't know how far anybody's got, but you may have listed all the Sattvik qualities, the Rajasic qualities and the Tamasic qualities. And if you look at all the Sattvik, Rajasic, Tamasic quality, they all interrelate in depending on which quality you're looking at. So all the Sattvik qualities, you know, to see in terms of Sattvik knowledge, you see divinity in the diversity, Sattvik action, actor, then dhrti, intellect, dhrti, you've got happiness and renunciation. So they're all part and parcel of what you've got to do if you're Sattvik, or to cultivate Sattva. Similarly with Rajas and Tamas, you don't have to cultivate. It actually is what you've got to get out of, in a sense, but it's giving you a way of verifying what you're at, what Tamas is, what you've got to get out of, what Rajas is, what might hold you in one place. So you've got to get out of that. Now you've got to cultivate. So here we were talking about last week, Sattvik Buddhi. So that capacity to be discriminate, choose, be objective, choose one swadharmic nature and go with your conviction. Assess it, go with your conviction. So look at the things which, with your conscience and conviction of what are the higher values, make that distinction, and then operate on that. One of the big values of helping to cultivate is the early morning, where you can just think clearly. Another one is to assess what sort of swadharmic nature that will help you have a push or a momentum in your pursuit. And it's that one which in actual fact sees the dharma in all aspects of life, whereas the Rajasic quality of Buddhi sees, it's actually confused in a way. It sees adharmic and dharmic. It's confused of what's what. It's got perhaps in its own momentum, it's got perhaps a sense of what's dharmic, but it gets caught up in adharmic qualities, mundane qualities, which are material. So there's nothing wrong in anything spiritual to have the material, but it's that attachment to it which spoils it all. So it doesn't know what it should fear or not fear. So it will go ahead and fear its benefactor in the Rajasic intellect, rather than someone which is going to harm you, or the environment which harms you. So it's not sure, it's not clear, because the focus is on the material. So it blurs out what the bigger value is. The bigger value becomes the material. And now we're set to embark on Tamasic intellect, which actually is no intellect at all, sees everything as topsy-turvy. which is when you're in that position, you can't see the sanity of things. You feel what's sane is everything insane. That's the norm. So one has to look at it and think about what you actually do. It actually almost is like that if you don't have, or if you don't have access to the bigger values of life in some form or another, wherever you go, by default, one sets into tamas because one doesn't have that awareness. If you have an awareness from somewhere or another, your history of cause and effects, your karma, then you can see it more clearly. But if you don't have that knowledge, it's easy to be lapsing into this tamas. So we will start with 32, unless there's any questions before we go ahead.
अधर्मं धर्ममिति या मन्यते तमसावृता सर्वार्थान् विपरीतांश्च बुद्धिः सा पार्थ तामसी.
Sam, if you could read the rest.
Verse 32. The intellect enveloped in darkness, which regards adharma, unrighteousness, as dharma, righteousness, and all things perverted, that, O Partha, is tamasika.
So everything is upside down. It's in a special class of its own, where you believe the negative is actually the positive. So tamas covers you, is that ignorance, it completely covers any thought of something bigger. It's like, I remember Swamiji used to tell us in class, it's like cold tar. So if you can just imagine tar covering you, it's almost impossible to get out of it. But it's not totally impossible, because sometimes, I don't know if you've seen ever in the roadside, out of the tar sprouts one little sapling. But it's got to have that strength and stamina to get out of that ignorance, because everything is upside down. So a person who's insane doesn't actually know they're insane. No clue. So the insanity is relative. You might be 50% sane and the rest of it insane. You're not going to know that insanity. What you do know is when you see somebody else, you can see their insanity. You don't know your own insanity. So you think you're a little bit better off than them. But you can't see your own insanity. So it's a matter of just cultivating that value, even in that state. Some of it may be on a very mundane level, that you cultivate a little bit of a bigger value than where you're at. And it may need support and a push from others to help you get out of that ignorance, because you can't see it yourself. So it sees, this one sees dharma, it sees adharma as dharma. It sees the higher values as negative and the low values as positive. totally upside down. Anybody think of any examples of this? Topsy-turvy. Anyone? It can be obvious, just a start point. A very obvious one, exaggerated. An addict, a drug addict, sees what they're doing as positive when they're addicted. It takes them away from their pain of whatever they can't face. So they feel that that's positive for them. So they keep with it. And when they get the recognitions that it's not so great for them, they're addicted. So the only way to solve their pain is to have a little bit more until they can get support to get out of it, until they get the support to recognize their own willpower. That's an obvious one. What else? That's a very obvious one. Because none of us are in that status, so we are not in that level that we can see it. Anybody else? Mm-hmm.
As a topsy-turvy example, if I wear the costume of a priest, I am a holy person.
Yes, it could be that. So it's not what you're wearing. Is that what you're saying?
Mm-hmm.
So the garments in the Bhagavad Gita states it very clearly, and the garments don't make the person. It's what's inside which matters. A rich person or a poor person, people don't understand who is rich and who is poor. We always gauge it by the material. That's topsy-turvy. We always gauge the capacity by the material exchange rather than the internal. That's another one. We pass off love. Yeah, pass off. Then it's attachment. Attachment kills you. Love makes you flourish. So the emotions are topsy-turvy. We pass off servile education, doing it to earn, rather than liberal education, which actually is promoting what you're about, to get to that truth, the opposite. And there's lots of them at each level. So anybody, any examples?
In driving, a crossroads is a dangerous place to be. So if you cross it really fast, you're there for less time, therefore you'll be safer.
Explain.
Meaning if you drive through a crossroads at 100 miles an hour, you'll be there for less time, therefore it must be safer.
So explain what you're meaning.
It's just Tamasic intellect. Upside down logic.
So they're there for a reason. Crossroads with traffic lights, I'm assuming.
Well, a Tamasic person doesn't observe traffic lights.
Exactly. What else? Anybody, anything else? Sleeping late is an easy one. I'm just giving you general ones. You have to think for yourself. No way you can get up early if you sleep late. Eating foods which are moreish in the beginning, actually poison to you in the end. Tamasic. No awareness.
Isn't the difficulty here that a Tamasic intellect doesn't know it's Tamasic?
Yeah, that's the problem. You don't know if you're insanity. You don't know to the extent, you know when you're sane, you know that much, but you don't know that aspect which is insane. So that's the problem. Everything upside down. It mentions this because the world is generally predominance of rajas and tamas and less of sattva currently. So it's more difficult to see the tamas because there's much bigger mass of tamas in the whole setup in different bodies, organizations. There's that. So it's harder to see because it's more the norm. So it's difficult to see, that's the problem. Isha.
So could you say us filling our day with lots of different activities and only keeping half an hour for self-inquiry is also Tamasic approach?
Tamas, yeah. Rajas. If your activities are spiraling you down to your indulgence or deprivation, it's tamasic. So if it's with no awareness, if it's with awareness to chase a material or something, it's got a momentum and it's rajasic.
So if it's pleasurable, if it's just having fun, then it's also seen in that way.
Not necessarily, can be rajasic, but the goal will be for something material. So it's that distinction. The goal of tamas is totally self-interest. It doesn't acknowledge anybody or anything else, whereas rajas does to some degree, but it's still with self-interest. It can be the shades of it. See, if you're randomly filling your day with activities, depends on the quality of the activity. And if you're able to fill it with activity, which is maneuvering in a direction of something, or another, even if it's a mundane field of activity, it's got a momentum of rajas in it. It's got some acceleration in it. So even if it's, but it's got some movement. Tamas is totally like going the opposite. It's actually asserting the negative as positive. It's actually saying, you know, I don't know if you, it's actually asserting that it's better to go to bed late, stay up and party and drink yourself to death. It's the way you enjoy life. It's actually, when you analyze it, why does one do that? There's something wrong. The prefix of what you're enjoying, you need to rush in and do it that way. So it's actually not enabling the following day to have that freshness. It's not allowing you to assert anything positive. So the tamas, you're not even aware of it because everybody's in that mass heading that way.
So these descriptions of intellect, Sattvik, Rajas, Tamasic, they're to do with, they're not to do with intellectual capacity, they're to do with one's approach to using one's intellect. For example, if some people say the world is warming up, there is global warming. So there are intellectual arguments for it, but there's also an approach that you could say is tamasic. I just can't think that turning on a light bulb will cause the world to warm up further. So can you separate the two, please? What is the difference between one's intellectual capacity and one's gunas?
Yeah, so it's exactly that. You know, you might have the knowledge of it being this globe as a matter example. As, the world is heating up. You can't be bothered to do anything about it, but you have the knowledge of it. You believe in it, but you can't bother to do anything about it. In fact, you carry on doing everything opposite to it. You don't care. It's too much on your mind. You know, sometimes you speak with people. Sometimes I've had various conversations with people, and they can see the information in front of them, but they can't take the step because it's too much out of their remit of, it's too inconvenient for them. So they'd rather inconvenience the whole than inconvenience themselves. They can't think that to be not with that convenience of whatever they do. So they'd rather put a blind eye to it. But in the whole scheme of things, it's like examining the rajas is where you put in the effort to do something about it, but it's only for material gain, it's mundane, it's not for a spiritual evolution. So it's not so much the action per se or the activity, it's the mindset. Your mindset, the lack of. So you're asking to separate the idea, the thinking from the action. The thinking backs the action. You could do a good action with a negative thinking, a tamasic thinking. Well, not so much more rajasic thinking, but it doesn't necessarily evolve you. It might help you give some steps, but it doesn't necessarily evolve you because you still keep your ego. But you could do an action in your environment which isn't particularly sattvic, but it's got an element of rajas. You're not able to do the sattvic action. So it moves on that level. But you know about the sattvic level, so you can maneuver there. Whereas a tamasic person just sees it the opposite, so they're never going to maneuver until they get that support of understanding. They get the support to maneuver themselves, and that takes time. Because they see it the opposite. The intellects lack of intellect actually doesn't see anything wrong in doing what's adharmic. It sees it as dharmic. So at the thinking and the action, you could do a positive action, but have no thinking of something positive. It just might be by default, by your own karma, cause and effect. But here it's giving you the ability to assess what is positive, what is negative, what is spiritual, and actually back your actions, be that actor, resolve that ego through your discrimination and through having that knowledge to be able to discriminate. I don't know if it makes sense. Yeah, is that making sense to you? I don't know.
Just to push this a little further, say I'm the Prime Minister and across my desk comes some very difficult strategic decisions. I can apply my intellect to those arguments, but am I also looking at myself and saying, am I being tamas, rajas, or sattvik in my application of my intellect?
Well, if you can see that, you can examine it. If you're tamasic, you won't be able to examine it. Chances are, if you've reached that stage of Prime Minister, you'll have at least some rajas in you and hopefully some sattva. But you may not be able to. If your predicament is predominantly with the mundane and the material, you may not be able to. If you are with an agenda of your own interest, you may look at it upside down, as you're only looking at what you want out of it. You may have got there by unethical means. People do get into positions because of the wrong means in different parts of the world. So you can tell if it's something sattvic, rajasic, and tamasic from the perspective you are. If you're in a sattvic state, you'll be able to quickly latch on that's rajasic or that's tamasic. But if everything is rajasic to that extent, you'll be able to look something below you on that level, but you can't see it easily above, or you can see it above in terms of your knowledge. So you've got to strive towards it. So if you're that way inclined already as a leader, then you'll be checking it in line with your spiritual goals or aspirations. Is this going to be a rajasic activity, tamasic? A rajasic activity or a sattvic activity could look tamasic to the mass because the mass's predominance could be something else. So are you brave enough to do it if it's a sattvic quality? Or vice versa, you may be doing something totally tamasic. And it's appearing as though it's great. So the individual has to really assess these things within themselves in the way they relate to them in their world. If you're at a sattvic state, you'll be able to see what's rajasic, tamasic, or sattvic. You're cultivating that. You'll be able to see that impact of that decision. But you have to have that Sattvik, Buddhi, dhrti, and knowledge to be able to do that global perspective. Shall we? Let's read.
Verse 32, the intellect enveloped in darkness, which regards adharma, unrighteousness, as dharma, righteousness, and all things perverted, that, O Partha, is Tamasika. Tamasika Buddhi is intellect shrouded in ignorance, which regards unrighteousness as righteousness, vice as virtue, sees things topsy-turvy, perverted. A Tamasika intellect errs in the transactions of life. For instance, a Tamasika person considers that richness lies in merely accumulating wealth, whereas richness is assessed by one's wealth exceeding desires. However, much a person amasses wealth, he would still be poor if his desires exceed his wealth. But the Tamasika intellect carries the perverted impression that richness is equated to wealth per se. Likewise, a Tamasika intellect views ill health as health, considers the obese and gross to be healthy, and those slim and trim as not healthy. Tamasika intellect also interprets preferential attachment as love, and those merely well-informed on a subject as wise. A Tamasika intellect also judges spiritual growth wrongly through non-essentials of religion, attributes spirituality to superstitious belief or mechanical ritual.
So all of these things that is mentioned are going on normally in the society we see today, and so it's to be alert of that. The way we judge wealth, the way we judge health. In some cultures, you're constantly eating. The concept of exercise isn't there. Or what you're thinking mentally. In most places across the board, spiritual well-being isn't to do with your headspace of what you think, how you think clearly, or how you identify globally. It's to do with all the rituals, the fear if you don't do those rituals, what will happen in your community or your society, how bad it will look, how good it will look, what dress you will wear, what, if you wear something. So the non-essentials of religion. And certainly love is passed off, and attachment is passed off as love. When attachment is that selfishness which perverts love. You like somebody, or you do something for somebody because they do something for you back, not because you ought to do it, and you identify with the whole. Not because of that purity of emotion. So These are very obvious things of being tamasic, which the whole of society has a degree of as the norm. There's no intellect going on here. So that's where we're at. So this is where we can get out of it, up it. Sattva, Rajas, and Tamas. If we're aware of these qualities, we can up our tamas to Rajas to Sattva. If you're aware of the Sattvic qualities, you can start attempting to cultivate that. If you're not aware of it, and you see adharmic and righteous as righteous, how can you change it? There's got to be some growth, awareness, education. You've got to put yourself in that position to get it. Nobody else will. You've got to do it for yourself. Dhrti.
धृत्यायया धारयते मनः प्राणेन्द्रियक्रियाः योगेनाव्यभिचारिण्या धृतिः सा पार्थ सात्विकी.
Guru, if you could read the verse.
Verse 33. The steadfastness with which one holds the activities of the mind, prana, life, breath, and senses unswerving through yoga, that steadfastness, O Partha, is Sattvika.
So, steadfastness, dhrti. Sattvik dhrti. So, unless you have dhrti, steadfastness, you can't reach the end of your action or your goal. You need that steadfastness. So if you pick up an action, it doesn't get complete. You need that dhrti to complete that goal, that consistency of purpose. That unswerving devotion, consistency of purpose, constant effort, choosing an ideal or a goal and channelizing all your efforts towards it. In terms of Sattvik dhrti, it's towards a goal of your own spiritual evolution. So it's a goal towards your enlightenment, which is spiritual, which is rarely spoken about in the society. Anywhere, Sattvik goal. So you might have an idea of what dhrti is in terms of consistency, steadfastness, but that persistence towards your own spiritual evolution, Sattvik dhrti. You're not swayed by your body, mind, and intellects, the attractions of the body, mind, and intellect. You pursue what you need to in terms of your body, your perceptions, your emotions and thoughts. You don't get distracted. I don't know if anybody knows the story of Ekalavya. Do you know the story of Ekalavya? Ekalavya was an archer, and his guru was Dronacharya. And Dronacharya was the guru of the Pandavas and the Kauravas. So Arjuna's guru and also Duryodhana's guru, the whole lot. He was the master. So Ekalavya was a great archer, and Drona had sort of like denounced him, not allowed him to be a part of the whole clan. So when he kept Dronacharya as his guru, and when he wanted to gain realization, Dronacharya asked him, what did he ask him, Guru? That was a very famous story.
As Guru Dakshina, he asked for his thumb so that he wouldn't become a master archer.
So the very thing which was his swadharmic nature, the very thing which was allowing him to refine himself, his guru asked to take away. What's the logic in that? Can anybody think? So he was dedicated to reaching the self, and he refined his perceptions, emotions, and thoughts through his archery. He refined himself in terms of his evolution. And then his guru asked to take the very thing which has enabled him away, to offer it. Isha.
As a reminder that he's not his body, or not to have an attachment to his body.
So it's part of that. So that's part of it. So to drop the very desire you're attached to, body, mind, and intellect, engaging in that desire. So to actually cross over the quagmire of desires, you've got to drop the very last desires. So by giving up his thumb, he dropped that attachment to what was very close to him, archery. So he got to cross over his desires to realization. But can you imagine? That's the very thing that you do. That's your very essence, and somebody takes the very core aspect of your essence away. Requests that. So the capacity, you don't get swayed by your body, mind, and intellect's attractions. You have the capacity to say no and keep on the right track. The capacity to choose with your conscience and your conviction. That firmness to keep you on the right path, to keep you off the worldly activities, and to keep you on the higher values. Nobody's coming with you on that route, on that path but you. So that conviction, that dedication. So Sattvik dhrti doesn't get stuck in the mundane activities of the world. He uses it, the world, as a vehicle to move through, to cultivate it, but he doesn't get stuck there. It's a pursuit of a higher. So you're in the world pursuing what you need to, but you're very much out of it, like a lotus in the murky waters. So you pursue what you have to in life, but you're very much objective to it. Sattvik dhrti. The thoughts are always on realization through your yajna, tapa, dana. And 17, we pursue through your service, through your channelizing your energies to that higher, and through how you gift back. So if the action is building your ego and not taking you higher, you've got to check, is it taking you down the ladder or up the ladder of refinement? You'll assess it. You'll assess, is it surface emotion or is there a depth of emotion? You've got to assess whether it's all encompassing or whether it's focusing on just you and yours, your activities. So everything in your actions, perceptions, your emotions and thoughts in Sattvik dhrti is constantly being ablated to getting to the self. All that you do is being ablated to the self. You do whatever you need to in your activities, but in the back of your mind, it's being ablated to the self. Let's read it.
Yoga, derived from its root yuj, to join, refers to life's mission to realize and merge with the Supreme Self. Mission hardly followed. The mass of humanity indulges in the body's sensual pleasure, caters to the mind's emotional demand, satisfies the gross intellect's curiosity. Thus, people are lost in the labyrinth of perception, emotion, and thought. The subtle intellect of a seeker conceives and pursues the self. Using this intellect, he practices self-restraint at the physical, emotional, and intellectual levels, steers clear of worldly entanglement. Sattvika dhrti is the unswerving steadfastness in maintaining his divine mission to attain self-realization.
So it doesn't matter what you do, where you go. The thought is, why? What's my purpose? Is it taking me to the self? That consistency of mind, is it taking me to the self? That consistency of purpose. Sattvik dhrti. Whereas Rajasic dhrti, let's see that. Okay.
Yaya tu dharma kamarthan dhrtya dharayate arjuna prasangena phalakankshi dhrti sa partha rajasi.
Isha, do you have the book? If you could read the verse.
Verse 34, but the steadfastness with which one clings to duty, pleasure and wealth, O Arjun, much attached and desirous of fruit, that steadfastness, O Partha, is Rajasic.
So we always think of duty as what we've got to do. But here is pointing out that wider connotation of duty. We make duties out of things. We hurry and worry and make our own duties out of things which aren't necessarily duties. The Rajasic dhrti. So we consistently pursue the mundane. But we've got to do this, and we've got to do that. We may actually, Isha, you mentioned earlier, I've got not you, but you're giving an example. If you have XYZ activities, but yet you only spend a half hour to take out time for this higher knowledge. So the focus for that half hour of wiring onto something higher is going to be obliterated by all the other activities in the opposite direction. So it's a consistency. That consistency of in the opposite direction is what the result will be. So there's got to be a consistency of purpose towards evolving your spiritual evolution. That's the only duty, as truth as duty goes. So we have duties in terms of my family, my job, my whatever. In fact, you might have the thing, I'd love to pursue this knowledge, but you have to examine, what are you actually doing to pursue this knowledge, to evolve yourself? But then actually, when you're asked to pursue this knowledge of the higher, or do something with it, do something about it, suddenly there'll be some activity which comes in place, which is more important. My life, my entertainment. So it goes off the spiritual evolution. Because in one's mind, one's set them as duties. And then the duties threaten you, oneself, and overpower oneself. It's you getting that Frankenstein, you create it, feel I've got to do it, I've got to do it. Steadfast in karma, mundane pleasures, indulging to the point of sickness, indiscriminate, rajasic dhrti, indiscriminate, self-imposed responsibilities, constantly running after acquisition and enjoyment as a duty. There's no limits. It has an infinite diminishing value which keeps you on the chase in the name of duty. We know at times past, one's grown old, and you think, what have you done for your own spiritual evolution, the purpose of your existence on the planet? What have your duties been? So we hug on to those responsibilities of worldly nature in terms of our duty. Let's read it.
So one quick question. So a lot of these aspects, it looks like, there's a lot of introspection that is required. Does it get tiring and confusing at some point? Because on the verses when we read it, it looks like there is a generic description of how they're being categorized. But when we really look at actions, day-to-day actions, at every step of them, it looks like there's a lot of introspection that has to go through, that we will have to go through to figure out, are our thoughts right? Are our actions right? Are the deeds in line with Sattvika or Rajasika? So these ones probably, so this is going to be an evolutionary activity, I understand. But does it become tiring at some point of time? Because it becomes easier for you if you had some sort of a manual and you just go by the manual. It looks like over here we keep updating the manual ourselves every day and try to follow them.
So that's why you've got something like the Bhagavad Gita to follow. Because what gets tiring is a Rajasic perspective or a Tamasic perspective drains you of your energy. But the Sattvik perspective injects you with energy, injects you with that momentum, because it's actually giving you a route, navigating a path towards what you're actually after. So it fuels you with energy. What gets tiring is trying to pursue this type of knowledge when everything else around you that you're pursuing is Rajasic. So you're trying to pursue something against the grain, So if everything's rajasic, you're fueling that. But the minute you start fueling the sattvic activity at the right time of day, the right sort of values, something may get sapped of energy in various areas, but you'll keep fueling it with that sattva, that knowledge that you gain, which will keep translating into your activities to refining you. So what tires you is the rajasic and tamasic values, not the sattvic values. The lack of knowing sattvic values tires you because it keeps you in that worry and anxiety. The lack of application tires you. Getting to the truth isn't tiring. It's all the appendages of your desires which are tiring. All the force of the desire, the distraction, the mind's whim and fancies tiring. Sattvik intellect is actually fueling. It makes you feel at rest. So the thing is, once you get a consistency in your intake of the bigger values, that dhrti, you have that conviction and consistency, that's the thing which alleviates your tiredness. And not having it doesn't help anything but sap your energy. So stress, the definition of stress we have in Vedanta is when your mind, manas, overpowers your intellect, buddhi. But when your buddhi directs your mind's desires, your emotions, then you're free of stress. But the complication is, because of our desires, the mind can hold the intellect hostage because of the lack of conviction, the lack of capacity, the lack of knowledge, the lack of action. The actor is unable to override those desires, so it gets stressed. It's not able to act correctly. It's got to get out of the tamas and the rajas. So you can do that by being consistent in fueling sattvic values, by being consistent in taking this type of knowledge in, whether it be from the Gita, whether it be from Vedanta, whether it be from any essence of religious text or literature which holds universal values. It doesn't matter where you get it from. You have to be consistent every day. Apply a little bit of knowledge. It's tiring when you don't apply the knowledge. You'll gain the knowledge to apply. I'll stop here. See you